Hello and welcome back to the League Winners Fantasy Show. We are down to the last division here for our divisional breakdowns. We're at the NFC West. This is the end of the divisional breakdowns. In the exciting news, we will be jumping into the positional rankings. So going at quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends starting tomorrow. So that's going to come a day early. We got some stuff coming on at the end of the month here and into August. So I'm going to try and rip out a little bit of content here quickly to get you all the information you need. It was a smart thing to push back the episode today because we did get a little news out of the NFC West as training camps are starting to open up today. So, a lot of fun stuff happening. And without further ado, let's dive into it. As you can see, no guests today, so we will be going a little bit quicker as we kind of just fly through an overview of the NFC West, starting with the Los Angeles Rams, who many are viewing as the Super Bowl favorite after they added Myles Garrett on the defensive side of the ball. At quarterback, they bring back Matthew Stafford, who had an incredible season last year, an MVP season last year. I don't expect him to be the same fantasy asset this year just because I think touchdowns will come back down to earth a little bit. He was out of this world in the touchdown department last year. I have him coming back down to 28 touchdowns this year, 4,300 yards, and not doing anything on the ground. So it doesn't limit his fantasy ceiling. He has great weapons around him. It's going to be a good offense. I just don't think they score quite as many touchdowns this year. Also, they should be playing from in front quite a bit, which will benefit the ground game. Turning to that, you have Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. There's been a lot of discourse about Corum potentially overtaking Williams as the lead running back in this kind of offense. I don't expect to see that this year. I do have Williams with over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, Blake Corum 700 yards and 5 scores, and Kyron still leading the way in the passing game, 38 catches, 250 yards. I have him just over 12 and a half fantasy points per game. I have Corum over 6.5. So I do think there will be weeks where Blake Corum gets work. And Corum could, as the season goes along, supplant some touches from Williams. But I am kind of leaning more towards Kyron being the lead back again this year. In the receiving game, Puka Nacua has some off the field stuff currently going on, but is expected to be fine and not be held back by any of that this year. And if that's the case, I have another big season for him. 115 catches, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, over 16 fantasy points per game. That's an incredible season out of Puka. Devontae Adams, obviously the other big pass catcher. I have him 70 catches, 885 yards, 8 scores. So a good season from him, over 10 fantasy points per game. Those are the two main weapons in this receiving game. I don't expect to see Jordan Whittington get a lot of work. There's talks about Terrence Ferguson at tight end. I'm kind of just out fully on Rams tight ends. I'm not in on that. I'm not in on Colby Parkinson, Tyler Higbee. Like I'm just avoiding the tight ends entirely. It's the two running backs, the two receivers, and then Matthew Stafford sprinkled in if there's a stack opportunity. Like if I draft Puka or Devontae, I am looking at Matthew Stafford later as my QB2, but avoiding the tight end room pretty much entirely and not getting overly invested in the receiver room beyond Puka and Devontae Adams. Now, like I said, we're going to go a little bit quicker here today, and we will be moving into the Arizona Cardinals. The big question there is Jacoby Brissett going to be the starter week one? We saw him hold out at OTAs looking for a bigger contract. They drafted Carson Beck. I expect Brissett to be the quarterback for most of the year. I think the Cardinals aren't very successful, but don't want to bottom out. I don't know what would stop them from that. So we could see some Carson Beck late in the year, but Jacoby Brissett, I think, is the guy to start the year. I'm not going to dive too much into his stats just because, like I said, when there's a question with a rookie quarterback, you don't want to invest really heavily into the veteran that might get supplanted, similar to Kirk Cousins and Fernando Mendoza. So I'm not looking very much at Jacoby Brissett, but there is a rookie in Jeremiah Love that is very enticing. I have him for almost 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, as well as 39 catches for 300 yards, uh, over 13 fantasy points per game. Now, Love is going to be drastically overdrafted. Aiden talked about it on the last episode, just kind of how you see the rookies get pushed up. That's going to happen with Jeremiah Love. So I'm not going to end up with too many shares of him, but I do think he's a talented player. I do think Tyler Algier is going to get a little underdrafted. I have him at about 5.5 fantasy points per game, 500 yards, 3 scores. I think he's a solid backup running back. I think we saw it when he was in Atlanta. He's a guy that can be the RB2. They brought him in for that reason. I don't think they try and run Jeremiah Love into the ground during this rookie season. So I don't mind in the slightest Tyler Algier picks later in drafts. I think he does have a little bit of standalone value next to Jeremiah Love. We have at the receiver room Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson. So Harrison missed time last year, was a little disappointing. Similar to Brian Thomas Jr. in terms of just not what you wanted to see out of the second season. Michael Wilson stepped up big, but Marvin Harrison is back. I think they kind of hurt each other quite a bit. I have Marvin Harrison for a very poor season. 55 catches, 800 yards, 6 touchdowns. So under 8.5 fantasy points per game, which would be a big letdown for him. I have Michael Wilson just over 7 fantasy points per game on 54 catches, 700 yards, 4 touchdowns. Not a great season from him either. I do think it does kind of hurt both of them that they're together. Also, My favorite tight end is available here. Trey McBride, I have as the tight end one. I'll spoil that for the tight end episode coming next week, but I have him as a tight end one. 118 catches, 11, almost 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, over 13 and a half fantasy points per game. I'm all in on Trey McBride this year. I think he is the workhorse in this offense. I think he leads the tight ends, all tight ends in targets. I don't have enough positive things to say about Trey McBride. He's one of my most drafted tight ends, despite the high draft cost, just because I think he is going to be the tight end one at the end of the year. Um, McBride and Algier are probably my two favorite targets on this team right now. I do have a little bit of Jeremiah Love sprinkled in, but the receiver room is just too weird for me. Harrison's the best player, but hasn't shown it and hasn't proven he can stay healthy. And Michael Wilson's fine too, but is there enough to go around with Trey McBride as well and Jeremiah Love? I just don't think so. I'm kind of avoiding a lot of this Cardinals offense. Moving on to the 49ers, where there's a new receiver in town. That's why I'm going to start here. Is Mike Evans is new in town. I have him for 51 catches, 700 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I worry about his health a little bit. Not projecting an injury, but I am on the lower side of his projection just because of the injury risk that is Mike Evans at this stage in his career. So that does worry me a little bit. Also, I mean, there's a good team around him. Ricky Pearsall I have for 7.5 fantasy points per game. They drafted Dizon Stribling, which is interesting, like way early, but now it's like everybody wanted him. They're playing a lot of mind games with him. But I expect him to be a contributor early on in the season. There's also still George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey, both threats in the passing game. Kittle, I have 60 catches, 800 yards, and 6 scores for 8 fantasy points a game. And McCaffrey, 72 catches for 648 yards and 5 scores. So there's a lot of mouths to feed on this offense. I think this does kind of limit the receiving threats. I'm kind of avoiding Mike Evans at his ADP right now, which on best ball is going right around Terry McLaurin and Jalen Waddle. I prefer those two guys. I think they have higher upsides with less competition, which is weird to say about Jalen Waddle, but I do prefer those guys to Mike Evans right now in drafts. Speaking of the running game, Christian McCaffrey, I'm very high on this year if he can stay healthy. I definitely have limited exposure to him because of the health risk, which Christian McCaffrey has been for a long time now. He's going in the second tier of running backs after Bijan and Gibbs. He goes right around Jonathan Taylor. It does scare me his health, but I have him for 17 and a half fantasy points per game, 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns on the ground, and I just mentioned the receiving stats. So I am a bit worried about his health, but if he can stay healthy, I love Christian McCaffrey this year. And then Brock Purdy in the quarterback game, I have him for 4,300 yards and 29 touchdowns. I think he's a very strong season. I have him for just under 17 and a half fantasy points per game. So I do like Brock Purdy this year. I think he's going in kind of a fair place right now. He's going right around the Mahomes area ahead of Matthew Stafford. So I think it's a fair price for him. I don't mind drafting him there. I haven't drafted too much of him. I just haven't been drafting quarterbacks in that range too much, but I don't mind the price, and I wouldn't be surprised if I continue to draft a little bit more Purdy as the offseason rolls along. The other backs to keep an eye on, Kalen Black, the rookie, and then Jordan James is back. So both names to keep an eye on if McCaffrey goes down. It'll be interesting to see as camp goes along who emerges as the two. No standalone value for either of these guys, but should McCaffrey go down, they are both names to keep an eye on. And then, yeah, like I said, George Kittle is the tight end. I'm higher on him than consensus right now. There was worries about his health, but it's trending towards him being good to go week one, which is exciting to see. So if he's able to go week one, there should be no hesitation pulling the trigger on him. And speaking of questions, week one, going on to the Seattle Seahawks, the news came out today that Zach Charbonnet will open camp on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. So that's a big sign. It was expected, but it actually going through is big. Reports are that he might not be good to go until October, which would be week 5 at the earliest. So I am projecting him to miss the time, which is a big boost, in my opinion, to Jadarian Price, the rookie they drafted this year. I expect big things out of him. I have him for 10 and a half fantasy points per game. He's going to get drafted very highly, and that's my biggest concern is he's going to just keep getting pushed higher and higher up draft boards. I like him, but not at the price he's going to end up going at. If you can get him now while he's still a little bit cheaper, I don't mind it, but he's going to be very expensive come redraft season, and that is my big worry with him. I have him for 1,000 yards and 7 scores. Charbonnet on limited time, 700 yards, 9 touchdowns. I think he does get the red zone work. Excuse me, when he's back and healthy. And I have Price a little bit more of a threat in the passing game as well. Speaking of the passing game, you have the Emerald City route artists, Jackson Smith and Jigba, back at receiver after a huge year last year. Pump the brakes on that a little bit, in my opinion. This year, I'm for over 15 points, fantasy points per game, which is huge, but 115 catches, 1,500 yards, 9 touchdowns. So another very strong season, not as big as last year. There is a little bit more competition with a full season of Rashid Shaheed, who people are very excited about right now. I'm not in yet. I want to see something out of camp because he didn't show much in Seattle last year. So I want to see something first before I project him big stuff. But he is rising up draft boards as people are excited about the potential of Rashid Shaheed. At tight end is AJ Barner. I like him a bit. I have him at about 6 fantasy points a game, 53 catches, 500 yards, 4 touchdowns. So nothing special, but a late round tight end target that falls in with a lot of other late round tight end targets. Seems like that's kind of the theme of this year in fantasy football. And then Sam Darnold, I have just eclipsing 4,000 yards and 24 touchdowns. So not a lot out of Darnold this year. I actually have him predicted very low. If I draft JSN, I might look Darnold's way as a last stab third quarterback situation, but I don't expect another big touchdown season out of him this year. I think he comes back down to earth a little bit. I think the Super Bowl champs take a step back this year, and I think Darnold's kind of the headlining of that. But yeah, like I said, I was flying through today. Just wanted to get the information out there for the NFC West. Tomorrow, I will be releasing a top 12 quarterbacks video. Very excited about that. Like I said, the end of July and into August, there's going to be a little bit of a gap and potentially a stop to the videos as I got some stuff going on. But we'll hopefully come back later on in August with some preseason content and then roll you right into your seasons. I thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.